our future needs to look like our past. We are not going to be the next Hong Kong, Shanghai, or New York. We're not going to be a concrete jungle. We have to be who we are,
Yeah.
and that is Florida.
Our neighbor's choice.
Well, I'm back for an exciting conversation. We're going to talk about Florida. We've got a new governor coming soon, and we have one of those candidates joining us today, someone who's been making a lot of noise and excitement on the internet, and he's taken a different approach than what people are used to in Florida politics. And so we have James Fishback with us. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing good, David. The last time my mom complained about me making noise on the internet, I was putting in that AOL CD and it was making noise to get booted up. And so
Yeah,
the noise on the internet thing would have meant something very differently 25 years ago.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, well, we're always glad to have people who are bringing fresh new ideas and taking an internet forward approach instead of the traditional, TV, approach to politics. That's a whole different ecosystem, isn't it?
It is, and I really like being online because it's a two-way street. You
Yeah.
go do a TV interview, you're really the only one talking. There's not a whole lot for the other person to add. But when you're online, it's like every single tweet that I put out, I'm reading through the comments. It's a free focus group. I'm getting really substantive pushback, some good debate that's happening in there. And so I think online is the best place to be right now if you're a conservative.
Well, good. I think it's going to be interesting to see how this race shapes up. But tell us first why you are running for the governor of the state of Florida.
Well, just forewarning, I wouldn't be running if Ron DeSantis could run for a third term. Sadly, he's term limited. If he were running, there'd be no point in me being in this race. I'm running for two reasons. The first of which, David, is we got to preserve what Governor DeSantis has given us. Before we can build on anything, we got to preserve and keep that ball rolling, keeping Florida free from radical DEI, transgenderism, voter fraud, getting rid of the Soros-backed prosecutors, ramping up the pace of mass deportations. We have been the number one partner to President Trump at the federal level in the deportation campaign. And so we got to preserve all of that first, almost lock those wins in. And the second reason I'm running is because it shouldn't be this hard to afford life in Florida, whether it's property insurance, property tax, auto insurance, getting a good paying job, affording groceries, whatever it is, college tuition, technical school tuition. It's really expensive right now to be living in Florida, trying to buy a home, trying to raise a family. And so this campaign is about preserving what Governor DeSantis gave us, not reinventing the wheel. He already did that, but keeping that wheel going. And then number two, making Florida affordable again.
So let's dive into some of those issues there. So the top line issue for you would be if you had one thing, what's the biggest one? Is there one that you think makes or breaks this election?
I think if you sum it up in one word, it's
Yeah.
affordability. Now,
Yeah.
look, that word gets thrown around by the Democrats every day now. That's their magic word. But the Democrats are in no position to lecture President Trump about affordability when they printed $5 trillion, drove inflation up 25% in aggregate over those 4 years, let in 10 million people into our country who stole jobs, literally robbing people of affordability. Think about it, David. If you had a job that was then stolen by an illegal or a legal immigrant, like an H-1B, and you have zero income, then everything is unaffordable. And so we don't just look at affordability as the cost of things. We look at it as what is your wage? What is your take home pay? Rand Paul and Ron Paul, both of them have really spoken well about this issue of purchasing power, of
Mhm.
inflation. And to tell you the truth, if prices doubled, that wouldn't be a bad thing if our take home pay had tripled. It's the fact that prices have doubled and our take home pay has not gone up as much to compensate for that inflation. And so I view affordability through that lens. And I also think if we're going to tackle affordability long term, we have to have a real plan to bring great paying jobs back to Florida. We don't want to be, as my opponent says, the financial capital of the world. We want to be the tourism capital of the world. We want to be the agricultural, the cattle capital. Before we went on, we were talking about the cattle auction here in Madison County. And there's a rich history of ag, of cattle, of citrus, of tourism, dare I even say of manufacturing in Florida. Our future needs to look like our past. We are not going to be the next Hong Kong, Shanghai, or New York. We're not going to be a concrete jungle. We have to be who we are,
Yeah.
and that is Florida.
Yeah. So, one of the things I have a background in citrus, so I'm familiar with citrus greening disease and everything like that. But, I think that's an example, that now I don't want to get you in trouble. I know how politics is here, but I feel like that industry, a lot of people talk about protecting the industries that America has from foreign competition, but having been in that industry for years, uh, I feel like a lot of the problems that the industry has is a product of government involvement, coddling the industry's practices, requiring so much regulation, and it takes a lot to get into that business. You can't just sell citrus directly as a grower. You have to go through, if you want to do fresh fruit, you got to go through packing houses and all these. It's a little mini cartel. They tried to protect with the Department of Citrus, and all it's done is not solve the problem of greening, not solve the problem of high quality product, and therefore the industry, which is an icon of Florida, has diminished greatly. And yet our soils, and this is where I'm going to get to, the ecosystem of Florida is so important. Our soils are so depleted. When you go into the citrus groves, it's depleted. It's almost like a hazmat environment. Sometimes there's so much pesticides, so much fungicides. You have to wear, remember those suits that they wore in E.T.? Did you ever watch the movie E.T. Extraterrestrial?
Yes.
You have to wear a suit like that just not to get bladder cancer from walking in a citrus grove. And it's not supposed to be like that. You're not supposed to raise food like that. I don't even know how they clean it really. But what we're trying to do, my work that I'm doing in citrus is trying to heal the soil again so that all of the produce of Florida can be the richest, highest quality, nutrient dense food that we used to grow, that our grandparents and great grandparents were used to. How do we get that back in right at Florida level instead of being dependent on big fertilizer, big government, big regulations to kind of coddle industries from reality?
Well, we have to be honest about what the problem actually is. And if government intervention and regulation is actually stifling agricultural output, and there are certain lobbyists and certain interests that are propping up those regulations and those demands for pesticide, fungicide, whatever, we have to look at that and look, nothing is off the table. Everything needs to be on the table to get this done right. I mean, Florida continues to be the sugar capital of America. There's a reason for that. You go to Belle Glade, Clewiston,
Yeah,
Moorhaven, you see the rich soil there. I'm not saying that necessarily any particular crop is the future, but I think agriculture in its entirety is our future. There's always going to be challenges. Citrus is chief among them. We peaked in citrus output in 2006. We're down
right.
94% then. Now, we've obviously picked up. We've got watermelon growing in Immokalee. You got strawberries down in Homestead. You got sugar all through the glades. But we have to actually prioritize agriculture for a couple reasons. I think we actually can bring down grocery prices
Yeah,
if folks are able to go directly to farms, not have to go through
exactly.
the packagers, not have to go through that regulatory morass to be able to buy food. Number one. Number two, when we're importing stuff from Brazil or Mexico, produce, it by definition is more expensive because it has to travel thousands of miles, either on rail or
Right.
on a boat or even by plane. And so when we can let people buy groceries locally from these communities, that means cheaper groceries for everybody. And then number three, that doesn't get talked about enough, is our agricultural industry in Florida provides incredible jobs for high school grads, not just college
Right.
grads, high school grads. And so we need to prioritize an economy where not only are you getting out of high school with the education and the skills to enter the workforce, but there's actually a workforce that awaits you that can actually give you a really great paying job right out of high school graduation. And so all of those things line up really well with Florida ag. Here in Madison County, we're growing peanuts. You'll know where you are and where I am as well. We've got a lot of cattle. And so we have to be honest about prioritizing the right things. But I think that when my
Right.
opponent talks about a financial capital, if that's going to be your priority, that's not going to be inclusive of our rural counties like Highlands, like uh, like Glades, like Hendry. That's not going to be inclusive of parts of the Panhandle. What is going to be inclusive is we have a consistent track record delivering in agriculture, and we have to double down on what we're good at.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's one of those things that I think you can't I believe there's a connection between heal the soil, rescue the people from the banks and the oligarchs. It's like if you can't grow good food and nutrient rich food that takes care of your family, then you're sick. Then you're dependent on on a global market for your citrus. You have to buy them from South Africa, like you said, or Chile. We shouldn't have to do that when we should be able to grow it in our own backyard. And when you can't depend on nutrient dense food, then you're sick. Then you have to have diseases. Then you have to go, pay all these bills to your kids having nowadays. Kids are having diabetes and colon cancer at 10 years old. Can you believe that? What in the world has happened to this system when we have big pharma running amok, the same interests, BlackRock, Blackstone, Black Stool, Black Feces, all these same companies, they're all a dime a dozen. What do? They own the pharmaceutical companies and the food companies, and they have garbage food and the nutrients. There's like one vitamin C per what it was used to be like 1,000 vitamin C milligrams in the same orange because of the depleted soil. And then we have our drugs are dependent. We're dependent on drugs to try to mask over the problem of poor nutrition. So I think these are things that will disrupt this left versus right paradigm that we've been foisted on upon.
That's right, and I think that's the right way to think about it, David. Is that it's not left versus right. I mean,
Yeah.
at the risk of sounding cliche, it's right versus wrong. Right? It is wrong to take money from BlackRoan and Blackstone
I
and
know I added
BlackRock.
some other names in there. I made up
You did add
myself.
a
Yeah.
couple in there with respect
Yeah.
to excrement, but yeah, I'll just give you one other example. When my parents were buying their first home in Broward County, where I grew up in South Florida in 1996, they were only bidding against two other families. I talked to a real estate agent this morning from Central Florida. She
Yeah.
says on any given home, you've got five investment firms, five private equity firms bidding against families who are literally trying to buy their first home, a home that is a precondition for them to get married, to have kids, to start a
Yeah.
new job, to write a new chapter of their life. And so that's why I'm the only candidate in this race for Florida governor who said, I'm going to ban Blackstone, ban BlackRock, ban Airbnb, ban foreign speculators from Canada or China or the Middle East or Russia from coming into our neighborhoods and buying up homes. That is not the American dream. That American families who have saved up and worked hard and ready to have a down payment on their home have to now bid against people who quite literally just stepped into our country or are hedge funds or private equity firms. Homes are for families. They're not assets to be traded between hedge funds.
Yeah. Yeah, talk about BlackRock. How about a black hole? That's what happened when I asked Ron DeSantis, and I'm not, I know you like Ron, and he's done some good things for sure, but I asked him one time in a press conference to look into criminally investigating Pfizer for pushing these shots onto pregnant mothers when they were having their, pregnant mothers. Can you believe this? And I asked him to would he criminally investigate it? And to his credit, he engaged it. And then soon after, we heard that there was an impaneled grand jury that he
Mm.
called in the state of Florida to investigate Pfizer and some of these other corporations who may have engaged in fraud, knowing that these products were not as safe and effective for certain, use cases, certain age group cohorts, especially pregnant mothers and little children, and that they withheld that information from the public and therefore should be investigated for fraud. Would you, and I say black hole because we never heard about what happened with the grand jury. I don't know if they ended up in the same place as that Malaysian airline that everybody talked about disappearing, but for some reason, I never heard anything from it. But yet, I was always used to grand juries. Whenever they're impaneled, they usually get an indictment. But I guess when
Yeah.
Pfizer is on the line, those indictments again vanish into thin air. So, would you investigate these? Because Surgeon General, we've had Latipo do a great job, Surgeon
He's
General
done great.
Latipo. And would you build on his work and keep him there in that position and maybe finally get some criminal investigations? I mean, look at Letitia James. She can
Yeah.
criminally indict like the president, and you got NRA and all these other people in New York. Why can't Florida do that for real criminal fraud potentiality in the things that we saw with Pfizer and um, what's the other one that Bill Gates was involved with? The M1 Moderna. That's it, Moderna. Yeah,
That's right. I think that what you're saying is spot on, is that we have to use every tool at our disposal. If you're going to have someone who's going to run for governor and say, well, I'm going to let the legislature decide how we're going to deal with Pfizer or BlackRock or Moderna or Blackstone. No,
yeah,
my job, if given this responsibility as governor, is to use literally every tool under the sun to hold these people accountable, to liberate our economy so working families and seniors are not having a war declared against them. And so your question in particular about Dr. Latipo, yes, of course. If he wanted to continue under my administration, if I were elected governor, I would absolutely love to keep him. I think he's the best Surgeon General in America. I wish he was the U.S. Surgeon General because we
yeah,
need some leadership up in D.C. right now. I think the Maha movement needs a little bit of a revival in D.C. because it's falling victim to a lot of those deep state establishment forces that conspired against President Trump in his first term. And for us, I think the solution isn't, I'm only running for governor. I'm not also running for every single House seat in our state legislature. There's a lot of people in there who are Democrats who are identifying as Republicans. They are transgender Republicans. They
yeah,
are not actual conservatives. They recognize that if they ran as a Democrat in some of these rural counties, they would never win. So it's very convenient for them to swap out the D and put the R next to their name. But I want to be very clear. What I'm proposing, and we can talk about specifics, but what I'm proposing does not rest on the legislature cooperating. We have got tools between the executive branch. The governorship actually in Florida has a lot more power than even the president. Let's not
yeah,
forget, David, the 10th Amendment means of our US Constitution means that whatever is not explicitly given to the federal government in the Constitution
right.
is reserved for the states and her people. And I'm going to be a big, big employer of the 10th Amendment if given this responsibility to be Florida governor.
Yeah, yeah. The 10th Amendment is something that you're not allowed to talk about. They have so branded that as such a freak amendment, that if you like the 10th Amendment, which is in our government, you're considered to be a weirdo and a strange person, right?
Yeah,
It's Florida, so we're used to Florida man, right? So we got to be the state that embraces the 10th Amendment because, like you said, that is the foundation of a lot of the liberties that we've taken for granted and therefore lost along the way of our republic. But, you know, I think that freedom is generally the direction people should always have. And I don't think that, that whole argument Tucker Carlson has made that, we're not people serving a market, but the free market should serve the people, right? Well, I,
correct.
I think at the same time, though, that freedom tends to serve the people more than cartels and oligarchic controls of
Sure.
our rights. So anytime we can preserve 10th Amendment liberties, I think that's a good thing. Let me ask you a question on that note then. Would you be in favor of allowing, this is something I've been developing and pushing in different legislatures around the country, and one of which is Alabama. So we don't want to let Alabama beat us to the punch here, but this would be what I call the Marriage Liberation Act, which would allow for a private option and the formation of marriages, right? We have a private option when it comes to schooling. You can do the government schooling, that's your default option, or you can opt out and go to a private school or a home school or a micro school or whatever, or a charter school, where there ought to be a private option for marriage license. So you don't have to have a government license with the government family court system be a complete monopoly. Why not have a little competition where if your faith institution so desires, they can construct a covenant or a contract, if you will, that is more in keeping with the values of the persons being married. So therefore, if you're Catholic or you're Orthodox or you're Baptist, you go to your local church, they might say, no, we don't get involved with that. We just do public option, government license marriage like everybody else. You're going to go through the same system. But then some churches might say, hey, you know what? We have developed our own covenantal agreement with its own terms of dissolution, and therefore we will marry you under our private covenant agreement, and that's valid and protected in the state of Florida, and protected. Of course, you'd always protect for issues of violence or anything like that, but you would allow for people to construct a marriage covenant with terms that are actually valid for the person's faith, rather than this one size fits all family court system, which we know predates on children. If we don't protect children, then we're not going to have a society. It doesn't matter how many jobs we have if we are not giving young men and women a healthy, safe environment where they can have marriage covenantally constructed with the terms that are in line with their worldview, which ultimately is protecting the children from no fault frivolous divorce. Then we can actually build generationally healthy, strong families and societies with low crime and brilliant minds and flourishing curiosity, which is important if you want to have a thriving economy. So, do you support that Marriage Liberation Act, the idea of allowing a private option?
I absolutely support that. And I can tell you, as a Catholic, the Catholic Church takes this very seriously. There's this
Yeah,
idea
they'd be doing some strict marriages, wouldn't they? Yeah.
very strict. You're
Woo.
not allowed to have a prenuptial agreement.
Yeah.
You have to meet with a priest. There has to be an interview process if you're going to get married in the Catholic Church. And so, what I want to see, David, more than anything, is not just on the issue of marriage. I want to see in every single arena of life the government monopoly of power and authority broken up, because that government authority, that government monopoly is no different from any other monopoly in history. We have to break it up. And until we do that, liberty is always going to be constrained and throttled.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. But can you imagine, you got a lot of Gen Z supporters, right? Oh, they're not getting married, right? They're scared.
They're
They're
scared.
scared of getting married because they feel like, they put in all their heart and soul into something and they raise kids, and all of a sudden somebody gets on and watches an Instagram reel by Kim Kardashian telling them to follow their bliss. And there you've got three or four kids in the hellscape of the family court system being destroyed left and right. That's where a lot of this leftism comes from. That's where a lot of this gender identity, when you get lost in that maze of the family court system, it's no wonder people are turning to these mental, checkouts like becoming a lizard or a furry and identifying as that. When you are a victim of this no fault divorce system, that's the elephant in the room nobody wants to talk about. And I think a lot of these guys that are in the Florida legislature, they don't want to touch this issue because they're afraid they'll get their tail kicked when they get home.
That's right. And, I don't have any allegiance to any institutions like the Florida legislature. I am a businessman of 10 years. I invested upwards of $40 million in companies that did the noble thing, which is to avoid DEI and hire people on merit, on skill and talent. And so I'm not beholden to these special interest groups. I've already said on the record, I am never taking a penny from AIPAC. I am never taking a penny from a foreign government. Because if you say you're America first, you actually have to back it up with actions. You can't say you're America first on Monday morning and then Tuesday night, you're sitting with AIPAC donors and how you're going to ingratiate yourself to a foreign power. That's not okay. And so I don't have anything against any country in the world. I am not anti any country in the world. I am just pro this country. I am pro Florida. I am Florida first. My family's been here for 4 generations. My great grandfather fought in World War I, ran a small hotel on Fort Lauderdale Beach. My grandfather fought in World War II, ran cattle. My dad drove the county bus down in Broward. And so when we say we need to put Florida first, that's not just rhetoric. And I think a lot of people are going to want to adopt that rhetoric because it sounds cool. You actually have to back it up. And for me, when you're letting companies come in here and fire Florida workers through no fault of their own and then replace them with H-1Bs from India, that's not Florida first. That's why I said I'll end the H-1B scam. If you're going to let AI data centers build up and you're going to let them drive up everyone's electric bills, that is not Florida first. And so I think, David, when we say freedom,
Yeah.
the question should be freedom for whom? Is it freedom for companies to discriminate against American workers and fire them because they want to import slave labor? If that's freedom, that is not the freedom that our conservative, liberty minded movement has pushed for since 1776. And I'm going to be a governor who really exemplifies a message of freedom that says freedom for whom? Freedom for American citizens.
So you have Donald Trump has endorsed Byron Donalds. I've had him on my show, Byron, and he has talked a big game about liberty and free markets, and I believe he's come out and said he's going to get rid of property taxes. So how do you stack up against his record and his claims of being the champion for liberty?
Well, he said 3 weeks ago that property taxes couldn't be abolished because it would mean the sales tax would double. So he's conveniently flip-flopping like a sandal on Naples Beach every time a new issue comes up. 3 weeks ago, he said that because our graduates are not, quote, economically viable, we need to import third world foreign labor. I don't know what Byron Donalds actually believes. Here's what I know about his record. Since he assumed his office in the US Congress in 2021, he has voted for every single spending bill that has come down from the Democrats and Joe Biden to now under the Republicans. He's voted for every single spending bill that has raised our deficit, that has raised our debt every single time. He's voted for spending bills that take more of the money we don't have, borrowing from China, spend it on things that we don't need, quite literally, David, for people who should not even be in our country. And so I would never judge anyone, least of all my opponent, Byron Donalds, by their words. I don't ask anyone to judge me by my words. Judge us by our actions. I started an investment firm that channeled $40 million of capital to stand up to the H-1B scam. I filed an amicus brief with the U.S. Supreme Court defending President Trump's Article 2 right to remove corrupt federal officials. I started a free high school debate league across Florida from Pensacola to Miami, engaging 5,000 kids in the art of what my friend Charlie Kirk did best, which is civil discourse, seeking truth through free speech and open debate. And so there's going to be a time for Byron and I to be on stage to compare our records. But I think at the end of the day, this guy has changed his tune so many times, it's hard to know what he believes. If he really says he wants to oppose property taxes or oppose H-1Bs, then I guess the question on the H-1B thing is why hasn't he introduced legislation to do that? He's a member of Congress. He can introduce that bill anytime. He's talked about this for weeks. He hasn't done anything. I'm in this race to deliver for Floridians, and that's just the reason why we're doing this.
Yeah. So, he has the endorsement of Trump, though, which seems to be the big thing everybody wants. How do you overcome that endorsement?
Well, I think you overcome it by overcoming it. I respect the president. I actually texted him the night before I ran, which was just 2 weeks ago, and said, this is Trump country. Florida is definitely Trump country. He humiliated Kamala Harris last year. He beat her by 1.5 million votes. But David, he did that by showing up to our rural counties. He did that by laying out a concrete plan of affordability. He did that never by phoning it in, always by putting in the work. And my criticism of Byron, he's been in this race for 9 months. He hasn't shown up for our rural counties. He has not proposed a plan for affordability. He has not have a definitive record on abolishing property taxes. And he continues to glaze the H-1B program and foreign immigration programs that replace our workers. That is wrong. I think the bigger thing to think about is how we overcome anyone's endorsement is recognizing that Florida voters decide who their next governor is. And a poll just last week of 1,000 likely Florida voters actually has us within a 10-point margin of Byron Donalds, even though we've been in this race for only 2.5 weeks. And so part of it is what you do. We could sit here and talk inside baseball political strategy, but the way I'll win this race is by getting the people of Florida to trust me and give me their votes. And we got 9 months to make that happen.
A lot of people said they had never heard of you before. So tell us more about your background. How, you say you're a fourth generation Floridian, right?
Yeah, I am. I grew up in Broward County, a little town called Davie. Went to public school my entire life. My dad was a bus driver. My mom worked a number of jobs. She worked as a cashier at BJ's, the wholesale store. She worked at the Broward County Sheriff's Office jail, looking through the mail. She went on to get an MBA and then became a financial analyst, is what she does to this day. My dad's worked everything from running a tree trimming business to being a city bus driver to doing Uber Eats. And so my parents have had an incredible story. They have an incredible marriage. I have the real privilege of having grown up in a two-parent household and all of the beauty that comes from that. Born and raised Catholic, go to Sunday Mass every single week. For me, my religion, my faith is the most important thing in my life. Everything I do draws from that. And so when I think about the issues, the debates that we're having, whether it's on abortion or transgenderism, I view these as a Christian as settled issues. These were settled when our Lord and Savior articulated our views in the gospel. And so that's how I come down on these issues. But yeah, public school my whole life. I now live in the Eastern Panhandle, North Florida, not too far from you here in Madison County. I moved up here for a couple of reasons. I was sick and tired of the urban sprawl of South Florida, lived there my entire life. And I wanted an opportunity to actually buy a home, buy something that was affordable. And that's what this place here in Madison gave me. I mean, 3,000 square feet, half an acre, right here in the historic downtown. I can look at the courthouse from my window right here, and I paid 250 grand for this place. I mean, you couldn't get a studio apartment in Broward County for 250 grand. And it's been great to see the state up close, different counties, especially through Incubate Debate, this free debate league that I started that hosts free workshops on debate, free tournaments, summer camps that allows kids to learn more about issues and topics and be pressed and challenged to debate the other side that they may not even agree with. And then through some semblance of that chaos, they get closer to this thing called truth. I went off to college in Washington, D.C., where I studied economics, left college early, started an
Went to
investment
what
firm.
school was it?
I went to Georgetown.
Did you see a lot of spooks in the making there?
Yes.
Yeah. So how do you know who you can trust over there? Which professor is trying to groom you into the CIA? Are you allowed
It
to talk
was
about it?
no one ever tried to groom me into the CIA. They knew my politics up front. They knew I wasn't going to be as impressionable as some of my classmates. I enjoyed my time there. It wasn't as progressive. It wasn't as woke in 2013, 14, 15 when I was there, but I enjoyed it. I think my biggest takeaway is the foreign students who were there really did not add to our universities. And that's why I get really frustrated when President Trump agrees on a trade deal to let 600,000 Chinese students into our country, foreign students to come to our colleges. I mean, David, we're the third largest state, so we could be taking upwards of 150,000 of them. When we go to FSU or UF or USF or UWF, there's not enough class spots for them. That means they're going to need to kick out Florida kids to welcome in Chinese kids. I'm not going to allow that as governor. And the cool thing about it is, as governor, the board of governors, which oversees our public institutions like FSU, UF, they report directly to the governor. And so I can simply sign an executive order that raises the tuition on every foreign student to $1 million dollars a year. And so when they can't pay for it, they'll have to unenroll from the university. And then that spot will go to a Florida kid, someone who's actually qualified, someone who's from our state, someone who,
Only
after they graduates, won't take a flight back to Dubai or China, but will stay here, get a job, and raise a family.
yeah, only Kim Jong Un and his MBS and those types of guys are going to be able to afford to send their kids there, huh? Goodness.
Yeah. Well, I don't think anyone's going to be able to afford $1 million a year. If you are, I think
Oh,
it's a
Kim
pretty
can.
powerful.
Yeah.
Maybe Kim can, but look, I think the bigger part is we're using price, as is often used in economics, as a deterrent, right? We're essentially gouging the price of foreign students to such a high level that makes it unpalatable because we can't have foreigners take over our universities and take these college seats from really qualified Floridians, whether they're in Escambia County in the Panhandle or I'm in Madison where I grew up in Broward. These kids work hard, they get great test scores. I meet them all the time and they can't even get into UF or USF. Meanwhile, you got kids from China or Dubai or the Emirates who have lower test scores, lower GPAs, but they come in because they want foreign diversity. That's wrong. That's not meritocratic. As governor, I'm going to raise tuition to $1 million so foreign kids do not take the spots of Florida kids.
Yeah, but at the same time, we've got to get some rigorous educational standards or something in there because when you go in there, I went to University of South Florida, and I was wanting to study communication because of my work in radio broadcasting and things like that, right? And a lot of the classes, gender identity studies and all these different critical theory classes are a waste of time, and so we gotta clean house in the quality of education as well, so that, otherwise you get rid of the, foreign students and then you have domestic students learning very dumb things, Like I always say, Russia spent a lot of time teaching their students how to build hypersonic missiles, and we've been teaching our children how to be hypersensitive people, where they don't know how to handle life, they don't have emotional control.
Well, there's no debate there. The I think the frustration is that kids who have done everything right, who went and got that STEM degree, that computer science degree, they were told there was going to be a six-figure job waiting for them after they graduated. They got a great GPA. They can't get a job because Amazon, Microsoft, Dell, they won't hire Americans anymore. They'll hire Indians or Chinese via the H-1B program. That's why, as Florida governor, I would end that scam by imposing a large fine on any company in Florida that seeks to fire or not even hire in the first place our qualified workers and bring in cheap foreign labor instead. But I think you're right. I mean, to the extent, and there is that to the case, although Governor DeSantis definitely cleaned house in a big way, there are still limited instances of our universities and our professors pushing things like white guilt and CRT and having classes on transgenderism or on, as one UF student told me last week, abortion being a human right. My test as governor to any class in our public universities is very simply, does this class help you get a job? Yes or no? If the answer is no, we are ending, canceling that class. Abortion is a human right. Does this class help you get a job? I don't care whether you're pro choice or not. You can't look at that seriously and say that that helps you get a job. Objectively, that does not. Neither does a class on African American transgenderism or gender studies or interdisciplinary
But you would say
diaspora.
we still need a place for humanities and
Of
liberal arts,
course.
right? The good
Well,
stuff.
of
Yeah,
course. I mean,
yeah,
history classes help you get a job. Absolutely.
yeah.
A class on Greek history would absolutely help you get a job. But these classes that push one-sided ideology, they can't be allowed. And as Florida governor, I would literally just cancel those classes. If you want to study them, go to a private university or go out of state. But we're not going to tolerate that here on the taxpayer dime.
Yeah, that's good. So property taxes, you would get rid of that completely? What's your plan there?
Plan's pretty simple. It's do what the governor's talked about, which is abolish property taxes, not for businesses, not for snowbirds, not for your second or third home in Destin or in Palm Beach, but only deliver property tax relief for Florida residents and their primary homesteaded resident. That residents. That's it. And so what that means is real relief. It's the largest tax cut in a generation for Florida families where you're paying five, ten, $15,000 to rent your home from the government. If families wanted to rent their home, they could rent a home. They bought the home so they didn't have to rent anymore, and now they're paying out the wazoo. Look at just Broward and Dade County alone, where I grew up in Broward. Between those two, property tax revenue is up 45% in just 5 years, David. 45%. The schools aren't 45% better. The roads aren't 45% better. The bridges, the airports, the infrastructure, the sewage isn't 45% better. Then why on earth are they collecting 45% more in taxation and theft from us? It can't be allowed. We end it. And then look, each county is going to have to decide how they're going to make up the revenue. You don't need to raise the sales tax on Florida residents. I'll tell you, in just Broward and Dade alone, these are tourism capitals. You got 103 million people who come into one of four, the Port Everglades, Port Miami, Fort Lauderdale Airport, or the Miami Airport. Put a tax on them. Put a tax on tourists from South America, Canada coming into our airports. Port Canaveral up in Brevard County. Put a tax on tourists there. But don't you dare raise sales taxes when you know that by eliminating just property tax revenue on homesteaded residents, you have the opportunity to make up that revenue quite easily. Now, the truth, of course, is for our rural counties, our fiscally constrained counties, I completely agree with Governor DeSantis that for places like Suwannee, Madison, Holmes, Jefferson, they don't have that revenue option from tourism. The short term solution is the state is going to have to step in and provide a short term bridge for that lost revenue. But the longer term solution is to revive these rural counties with agriculture, with farming, with cattle, dare I say, with manufacturing. If we can do that, the long term solution to a loss of tax revenue is always increasing economic activity. But I'm never going to let that economic activity be another liquor store or self service car wash. It has to be real, valuable economic growth. Things like cafes or bookstores or ice skating rinks or manufacturing, things that one respect our environment and actually create great paying jobs for local residents.
Yeah, it'd be great if you could have, like a sushi menu when you're paying your taxes and check what you want to actually fund. Like I want my, like for example, people don't want to have their money go to government schooling because they don't want it. They don't want to use it. They don't believe in the religions and ideologies that are taught, and they want to be able to use their money for what they think is more appropriate. Maybe they want to allocate more money to the local fire department or the police, or they want to give it to roads or whatever. Everybody's always worried about the roads, remember? So that's the problem. If you let people, people are so worried. People, every time you want to cut government, they say, "What about the roads?" So that may be a problem with my idea. Is that if you give everybody a sushi menu, they're all going to pick the roads, and then you have like the most robust transportation and roads department in terms of funding that people don't really actually need that much money for roads. But why not give people more options about what they want to fund with their money? I don't want to have to fund these ridiculous schools that are, again, it's a joke, and people can't touch it because they're afraid. They're afraid of the unions. They're afraid of the mythos that they're touching when they touch that issue. But the only way we're going to get out of here of this mess and get people to think with their minds again is when you allow them to have competition in schooling.
That's exactly right. And there has to be a competition of ideas. There has to be a marketplace of ideas. That's
Yeah.
why we need to reinvigorate debate in our public schools. We have to have
Yeah, you're
literally
doing the
debates in
debate.
history
Yeah.
class.
Tell
And
us,
so
why
I
did you
know
create
this.
that? Yeah, why did
I
you create
was
that? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, I was on the debate team in high school all 4 years. It totally changed my life. I was a national high school debate champion. Think about, you talk about the big issues like property tax and infrastructure and investments and rural counties, but if there's a pet project that I would have as governor, it would be to bring a revival of open debate, free speech, marketplace of ideas to our public schools. Our kids don't just need to be on debate teams competing regularly. They need to have debates in class, whether that's history or English class, having real debates about the subject matter so they can, one, learn more about the subject matter, and two, become better speakers, better communicators, and recognize that there is a real art to disagreeing agreeably.
Yeah.
And that would be my little niche pet project if elected
Yeah.
governor, is to oversee the expansion of free debate in our public schools.
Yeah, you mentioned APAC. Why have you taken a stance about taking money from APAC?
Well, I've taken a stance because Miriam Adelson, before I even entered this race, was there were rumors circling that I was going to run. She announced that she's raising a war chest to fund against my campaign. When you've got candidates out there who are taking money from AIPAC and then turn around and say anti-Semitism will not be tolerated. Look, we should never tolerate any religious discrimination. It doesn't matter what the religion is. But you are in America, you're allowed to criticize Israel. You're allowed to criticize Qatar. You're allowed to criticize Russia. Our founding fathers literally died for our right to criticize the American government. They'd be rolling in their graves that certain universities are trying to punish and discipline kids for criticizing the Netanyahu government or war crimes in other parts of the world. And so, for me, I'm absolutely against any form of religious or racial hatred or discrimination. I would prosecute that under the fullest extent of the law. But I'm not going to allow this quote unquote anti Semitism scam to allow people to punish our people, our citizens, for voicing protected opinions under the US Constitution.
Why does she want to come after you? I thought you're not a threat, huh?
No, you're right. I'm a fringe candidate. But
It's funny though. Everybody talks about China. Doesn't she get her money from these little shady casinos in China, CCP, Malaysia, or what is it? What
in
state?
Macau,
Macau. Yeah, isn't that Chinese money being laundered into
it's
those casinos?
all that's all Chinese money being
So
laundered.
why? So we're getting a lady who's got Chinese CCP money. You're looking to your left. Is she there? And Miriam just busted the door.
She's down here on the floorboards.
Uh-oh. So this is like the ring. Oh my goodness. So she's getting CCP money, and then she's got it over. And then also she's heavily involved with Israel, but she wants to decide who the governor of Florida can be. How can she use CCP money, casino money? We have good Seminole tribe casinos here. We don't want CCP Chinese casino money deciding who is allowed to be governor here, do we?
No, we don't. And foreign interference in our elections should never be tolerated, ever. It doesn't matter the country. Everyone wants to say, why are you only talking about Israel? No, let me talk about Qatar. Let me talk about China. Let me talk about any other country. We were peddled the lie about Russia interfering in the 2016 election. That was a slanderous lie to delegitimize President Trump's hard fought victory. But what is not a slanderous lie is that Qatar tries to buy our universities, Israel tries to buy our politicians, and AIPAC is the most important lobbying group these days. And they've already come out against me. And so, if you're going to say you're America first in the morning, but then take money from AIPAC in the afternoon and then go to your voters and tell them you're going to put them first, you can't possibly, in good faith, honestly say that. And so I'm not taking a dollar from AIPAC, and I challenge Byron Donalds to give back the money that AIPAC gave him and actually do what's right for Floridians, which is to never take money from any group that in any way is aligned with a foreign government.
Now, how do we know when if you get the nomination, you didn't get go fishy on us and start showing up at the wall with a hat on and everything, trying to say, "Hey, I'm sorry, I just had to win the election."
Let me make my commitment right here that the first country I visit will be Brazil because one, I did study abroad there, but two, I recognize that they buy $19 billion of our stuff every single year, mainly manufacturing equipment, aerospace equipment. And so I want to go down to Brazil in my first 100 days and get a trade deal that creates thousands of great paying jobs for high school grads all over the state. And
I
so
thought you were about
I,
to say they send us 19 million people to Disney World every year. They do that too.
well, they do that too. Yeah, they absolutely do that too. My job
Watch
is
out for the OJ though. That's a touchy subject. Brazilian orange.
very much so. And I
Yeah,
prefer Florida orange juice to the Brazilian oranges any day of the
yeah.
week. But, when if I ever travel abroad, it's only going to be in the interest of economic development in our state. There's not going to be any cultural
So you,
enrichment to me standing traveling
wait,
abroad
so you're
just
not
to
doing your first cabinet meeting in Tel Aviv if elected?
I not at all. I've actually never been to Israel. I was offered to go to a paid trip to Israel this year. I refused. I also refused to go to a paid trip to Qatar recently as well. I don't believe in ever traveling to a foreign country on a foreign government's dime. If I want to visit Israel or Qatar, honestly, I don't have interest in visiting either, to tell you the truth. But if I ever want to visit either, I'll do that on my own dime, and I certainly won't do it as Florida governor.
Well, I think that's the kind of stuff people want people to be focused on their own people. They want people to be elected who actually care about their people, their actual people. So I think that's going to be the future. Whether those folks are allowed to get into office or not is another thing. I think the Ice Queen, Susie Wiles, would be very keen on making sure that her good friend Byron, gets in there. So it's going to be a tough fight that um, you're up against. Are you concerned about dirty tricks? You talked about election integrity. These are you concerned about hit jobs coming at you soon? Is there anything you need to get ahead of that they're going to try to smear you with?
Well, there's only been four hit pieces nationally in the last 2 weeks, one of which had to get retracted last night from an NBC affiliate here in Florida because they totally made it up. They said there was some civil case and some financial settlement that I paid some woman, and they literally came out this morning and said there was never a case, there was never a settlement, and our apologies to Mr. Fishback. So look, I don't have any illusions that people who are desperate are going to rely on things like the Believe All Women hoax. The same thing they pulled on Justice Thomas, they pulled on Justice Kavanaugh, they pulled on President Trump. I asked Florida voters to just look through all that nonsense. Think twice, stay vigilant. I'm in this race because I believe I have the best vision for Florida, but I'm never going to ask you to blindly believe that. I'm going to visit all 67 counties over the next couple of months to talk directly to voters, to not give them a stump speech, but to talk for 5 minutes and then let them do all the talking and let me answer questions. I did that at UF for 2 hours with 150 students, and I'll do that in every single one of our 67 counties over the coming couple of months because you deserve to see a governor that will come to your place, will talk to you, will debate with you, and dare I even say you'll be able to yell at.
And you'll be able to, are you going to support the idea of, we talked about a little bit, but more specifically, food freedom? I
Yeah.
think that a lot of the future will be such that, right now it's technically illegal for churches to offer home cooked meals, in a public setting like a church, that no one does anything to attack it. But I think that the idea of allowing people to sell food directly to neighbor without having to have a licensed kitchen, which is all just designed to protect, food industries from competition. I think that would help people, especially as times can maybe get tougher for folks with inflation, to be able to say, you know what, I can look up online and find some lady who makes fantastic lasagna, someone's grandma who I never even knew existed. She sells a few things of them every Saturday, and I want to be able to buy them. I don't want her to get arrested. Is that
Yeah.
something that you would support? So food freedom, not only from the farmer, but people should be able to share food without having to go through this licensure process.
100%. I support that 100% because my mom used to do that when I was a kid. I don't want to out her, but I think the
Uh-oh.
statute of limitations has lapsed on selling arepas, which is what she made when I was a kid. And I absolutely would support that because look, competition is good. There's never a situation, and the licensure and the occupational licenses and all of those regulatory moats, they rely on this faulty premise of safetyism, that we need to protect people's food safety enough. Enough. Look, if people don't want to eat something, they won't go there, and that place will go out of business, whether that's a mom and pop restaurant or a high end steakhouse. It's always been the case. And actually, we've seen real food safety concerns out of these public restaurants. I think that it would be an incredible feat to not just let farmers feed people directly, but also to let mom and pop restaurants prop up right in people's own communities to be able to come together, right? I mean, yes, I think there's an ability to have really accessible food, have it be really cheap. But what I'm really interested in that plan, David, is the ability for people to come together. We need third places. We need places where people can actually bond and be Americans once again. There's that sense of community and identity that it's just not the way it used to be. And I mean, I'm a 90s kid, but I knew every single one of my neighbors growing up. They took care of us. We'd go out and play in the pool together, and that we'd go to church together. We'd carpool to Disney together. And that sense of community in large parts of our state isn't there yet. And so this idea of opening up our communities to food, to sharing, that's great for prices and affordability. It's also really, really great for community.
What would you say to the Silicon Valley folks that a lot of them are fans of my show, by the way? They go way back. I won't name names right now, but a lot of them have congregated in South Florida during the COVID and all that period of time, and they've made Florida a main hub of their activities. But I know you've criticized some of the venture capital and Silicon Valley type people. What would you say to them? Do you want their support? Do you take a hostile tone to them, or you're kind of one of them, right? You kind of talk like one of them in some ways, right? I'm not saying that as an insult, but I would say you have the same effect as like affect of like Vivek sometimes, but he's a great communicator and he's a young guy with charisma, and you obviously are too. What would you say to that kind of cohort that says, "Hey, we're Silicon Valley, we're future, we like a little bit of support for H-1B visas." I'm not want to say that's the only issue they're talking about, but that is a big issue right now.
Well, on the H-1B position, my position is it's non-negotiable because I cannot allow the great replacement of American workers to take place in our state. I can't allow college grads or recent grads or even high school grads who've done everything right, are fully qualified, to be totally sidestepped. There's a hotel in Miami where usually you would have a young girl there staffing the front desk. Now there's an iPad with a guy on Zoom who's checking people in from Mumbai. You can't make this up. I posted this on X a couple of weeks ago. This outsourcing, this offshoring of jobs, it doesn't just rob people of opportunity, it robs people of dignity and purpose
Is
and
that a robot you're
self-sufficiency.
talking about? Is it
No,
like
not even a robot. It was actually a Zoom. It was actually someone who was live in India checking people in over a Zoom call with an iPad at the front desk.
that happened to me recently? I went to the Grand Canyon and a little robot booth greeted me, and it was this
Well,
guy.
I think, yeah, I think that's one thing, but I think
Yeah,
the
it
idea
was.
of firing a young girl from
Yeah,
Hialeah or
yeah,
from Davie, where I grew up, who would
yeah,
have worked at that hotel and would have used that as a starting ground
yeah.
for her career to get a little bit of income, to buy her own place, to get married, to have kids, that opportunity was stolen from her. And so for me, I'll meet with anybody. I'll meet with the tech bros, but I'm not going to budge my position on H-1B or on outsourcing or offshoring. I want to protect American jobs. That's where my allegiance is to America first, Florida first.
Did you invest in tech? Was that your major focus of investment? You said you did investments.
So I was a macro trader for most of my career. So I actually did currency and interest rate derivatives. So things like inflation swaps, predicting where inflation was going to be. That was my background as an investor. But most recently, we did invest in some tech companies. We actually got a lot of flack because we launched this anti-DEI fund that we wanted to convert to an anti-H-1B fund. We wanted to add the ability to exclude companies that abused the H-1B program by firing American workers. We thought it was immoral and unethical. We also thought it was just a bad business decision to let go of qualified people in favor of cheap foreign labor. And our board of trustees, which is an independent body of my company, Azoria, voted that we could not do that and instead voted to delist the fund. And so there is this monopoly, yes, that government has, but also private actors in blocking conservatives from stepping up and trying to stand up for certain interests. And so that was disappointing. But my career has really been mainly as a macro investor, thinking about the Fed, currencies, and
So
interest
you're kind
rates.
of you're in this playing in the same game as people like George Soros or Jim Rogers, where they bet against currencies. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I would obviously disagree
I'm
that I'm ever in the
I'm
same
not
game.
saying you're betting against the currency, but that's in the same world, right? Or, that's no, not.
Yeah, I think it's vaguely similar, in the sense that, two people who are very different politically could also both go to the grocery store, right? I think that,
Mhm.
my career has been one in which I've studied the Federal Reserve, I've studied the European Central Bank and identified ways to profit from the mistakes that they've made. And you
Yeah.
know this better than anybody, David. You've talked about it on your show. The Fed has been the source of our problems. They've never
Mhm.
really been the source of our solutions. And so my career has been identifying if the Fed is going to err over here, how can we move money? How can we bet against the euro or bet against the Canadian dollar or put on an interest rate or inflation derivatives trade to profit from that to benefit our investors? That was most of my career.
Are you familiar with Tom Luongo? He's a financial, commentator, and he has his own gold, guns, and goats.
I'm
Yeah,
not.
yeah, he's on Newsmax. He's a North Florida based guy that he's talked about the Fed in a unique way that I wanted to ask you about since that's your specialty. Is that he says that the Fed, although it is evil because he has a libertarian origin in his mindset, he thinks it is something that we should use to battle against a greater evil, which is the London and European old banking powers. And he talks about
Mm.
how we transition from a LIBOR system to this SOFR system, where
Yeah.
we went from this London, 13 banks in London basically deciding the price of the euro dollar to something that is much closer to putting sovereignty back into American hands about the dollar and what it will be priced at for others. And he says this is the big issue. And so, therefore, he, although in the long run thinks the Fed should be ended, at the short term right now, he thinks that it's like having the biggest military. Our Fed is our power in relation to these other powers, and we should wield it as a way to combat the power of London and other European banking powers and their control over our politicians and our politics. So he's saying that the financial precedes the political, and therefore we should use the Fed as the biggest bludgeon on the block to take out these European power centers that have long ruled the world. These old dynasties and their banks, these globalists as we call them, or the World Economic Forum is the more popular term.
I wouldn't trust anybody at the Fed as far as I could throw them. They're all globalists, the Europeans, the folks from London here at the Fed. They're all the same. I mean, 97 cents of every dollar donated from the Federal Reserve's employee base goes to Democratic candidates or causes. For every one Republican economist at the Fed, David, there are 10 Democrat economists. So I guess forgive my skepticism, but I would not trust the Fed with anything, least of all in using them as a leverage point in a geopolitical sphere of influence. What I support is what I did this past summer, which is my investment firm Zoria sued Jerome Powell, our Fed chair, in federal court over what we saw was pretty clear, the contempt for President Trump in refusing to lower interest rates from near 20-year highs, making mortgages a lot more expensive they should have been. And so I support a Fed that is effectively ended, that brings transparency and accountability. The truth is, the President of the United States can't even fire the Fed chairman. It doesn't matter how bad they screw up. That's messed up. And that's why I took the Fed to court in DC federal court earlier this year. I think we need a monetary system that actually works for everyday people. And there's a war against working people, against retirees in our system. It's a war that's been waged by Democrats and Republicans. It's contributed to the worst inflation now in 40 years that we experienced under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And my job as Florida governor is not to make excuses for what the Federal Reserve System or even the federal government is doing. It's to stand up for our workers and our retirees right here in the Sunshine State.
We recently had on the guy that led the charge for passing the gold being permitted as legal tender. And then that passed through the state legislature of Florida, and I believe they removed the sales tax for gold. Um, would you do anything to expand that? Dr. Ron Paul, famously talks about how the Constitution says that gold and silver should be legal tender at the state level. That the gold that's how the banks, I mean, that's how the state should deal with money. Um, how do you strengthen that position? Right now, people don't want to give up their gold and silver to pay their taxes. So they're going to be a little tight on that. But you could imagine if there could be a way for people to easily, attach gold and silver holdings to a debit card type situation and then be able to transact with ease without having some kind of convoluted system, that maybe they could allow for this opening for people who do want to be able to save their money. Because you're right, when we had hard money before, you could put away your gold and silver back certificates, and when you retire, they actually can buy more stuff, as opposed to today's situation where our money is so rapidly inflated that you have to gamble you have to gamble on the casino of the stock market in
Yeah.
order to have a retirement. And that shouldn't be the way it is. I mean, right now, doesn't the state of Florida go and buy junk bonds in Israel to prop up the war over there with our retiree money? I mean, obviously you wouldn't support that, would you?
I would not support the buying of any bonds of a foreign country. I would ask every state entity here in Florida and every county government that they have to divest that and actually invest in gold and silver and Bitcoin instead. And so, yeah, I want to create a parallel economy that actually allows people who can actually build up a nice stock of reserves, whether that is Bitcoin or gold or silver, or dare I even say palladium, platinum, osmium, iridium, it doesn't matter, and actually use that to borrow against that for everyday transactions. When you think about the price of things, they haven't moved all that much if your wages and if your life and your assets were denominated in gold. And so I
Right.
would want to create a financial system that actually celebrates that decision on behalf of workers.
And a lot of people, again, could hold their money and they wouldn't have to gamble in the casino like, Adelson style. We don't have to play casino games to have a
Correct.
retirement. That's the way it should be in
Correct.
normal, sane society. Hey, I'll leave you with this question. You said you're a devout Christian. What do you think it means when Jesus was brought up by Satan on the cliff and he was told, if you would only bow to me, you would
Yeah.
have the kingdoms of the world. What do you think that means as you pursue one of the highest positions in the United States of America at a state level to be the governor of a state of this size and wealth?
Gosh. I think the meaning there is very similar to what we see Paul talk about in Ephesians and First Corinthians is the motivations of flesh over the spirit, to not get too obsessed with materially worldly possessions, to not focus on bowing before any false god, any false prophet, to gain material possessions, to then lose your soul in the process. My life verse is Luke 6:46, which is, why do you call me Lord, Lord, but not do as I say? And I think about that every day. I think, and I'm guilty of that. Folks who rightly call themselves Christian, but find themselves erring, find themselves directly disobeying the commandments and the precepts of Christ. And so I think that act in particular was one in which Lord was enticed in many ways, in the way we are enticed every single day, to do things that would profit us, but in no way profit us by getting rid of our soul in the process.
I appreciate your time, sir. Where would you like people to learn more about your campaign?
Fishback2026.com. We're posting the full platform on there very, very soon. It's just been working at a million miles an hour. We, in this economy, David, I'm not asking anybody to donate who can't. I'm asking, if you're interested in our campaign, volunteer an hour or two a month, knock on doors, put up signs, do text messages, social media, contact voters. You can volunteer at fishback2026.com. And of course, if you want to stay in touch with our campaign, you can follow me personally on social media everywhere. Just James Fishback, just how it sounds.
We got to bring the Florida Panther back too.
I agree.
All right. Take care. Thanks, James.
Thanks, David.
What is a man? What has he got? If not himself, then there's not to say the words he truly feels, and not the words of one who is the record.